Hello and welcome again to Mjolnir at the Movies. I'm David Yorkshire, editor of Mjolnir magazine, and with me as ever is independent filmmaker and composer Neil Westwood.
Hello.
Hello, and with us for this episode 9, we have James, who you
Hello.
may have seen in the comment section of YouTube as Bevel E. And I hope he's not transgender. And this is his this is his debut doing a show such as this. So I hope we can break him in gently, not in a gay way, but anyway. And what a great subject he has for a debut, because today we're looking at Alex Proyas's masterpiece Dark City, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, believe it or not. And then also we're going to look at the Matrix series of films in comparison with that, because and these were written and directed by the Wachowski brothers, both of whom have gone on to become so-called transgender persons or whatever. So it seems to be a recurring theme at the moment. But I've chosen to do these two films or franchises together, as The Matrix is more franchise now, in that they tend to have a lot of similarities as well as differences, and they tend to sort of interact with each other. The Matrix was filmed a year later, for example, and it used the sets built for Dark City. And there are also many similarities of theme too. So start off with what are some of the big themes that both of these films or series of films address? Would you like to start us off, James, as you are our guest?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes without saying that Dark City was absolutely fantastic as a package. It felt like a modern fairy tale, just like the kind of the old classic European ones that you can hear again and again, and it just keeps ringing true. While The Matrix, it felt like it was like a saccharine drink by comparison. It was a very different experience, even though superficially you would think it would be the same if you just had a kind of glance of the film and maybe some of the stills without thinking about it.
Yeah, there is that sort of theme of darkness and also of other worlds as well. In fact, that we are not experiencing reality as we know it. I think that is one of the big themes, isn't it?
Mm. And it also definitely feels that Dark City taps into more of the past, more of kind of ancient cultural stories and so on. Even the antagonist, the horrors that chase him are this sort of vampires, really, rather than in The Matrix, it's a man in a suit. This, obviously the sort of G-men is meant to kind of allude to, but it's not got the same fairy tale feel to it.
Yeah, that's very true. The Matrix to me has a more corporate feel to it. I mean, one of the major differences in style is that with the Matrix you've sort of got stylistically cyberpunk, whereas with Dark City you've got more film noir and German expressionism, and also the artwork of Edward Hopper. So the American artist from the earlier part of the 20th century. And so you have more of a retro feel to it, even though they're working with the same sets, which I find very interesting.
That is quite a. I never had knew that at all. I certainly wouldn't have spotted it without being told. Just watching the two, even though I watched them almost back to back, I didn't notice that overlap in sets.
Yeah, and one of the things is that with this idea of the retro feel to it, it really sort of blinds you to what's coming later in the film, to the big reveal. I think that is one of the reasons why you really don't see the big reveal coming in Dark City.
Yeah, in The Matrix, it was almost telegraphed to you before it happened. Although they said you had to see it to know and to believe it, etc. You thought, no, actually, by that point, it was almost obvious what was going on.
Yeah, pretty much. It didn't really leave any room for suspense, did it?
No, it was like it was following a rail track rather than you were following a kind of winding path in the woods. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what's going to leap out at you next and surprise you. While The Matrix, you felt like you were just going down this slope. You could see the end of the slope, and you just had to follow it.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, both films really are, in a way, sort of Bildungsroman, and almost the idea that of someone going out into a bigger path, the hero's journey, if you like. So the journey from normally with the Bildungsroman you have a young person, although in these two films they're older, but yet you still have this journey from sort of small beginnings into a bigger path, into a more heroic path, and I think that you have both those things in the two films, but in very different ways.
It's also interesting if you have a look at according to what I could see online, the casting choices, where I think Dark City, you felt, oh yeah, these characters played the roles perfectly. I find it hard to imagine someone else. While in The Matrix, there were so many roles, you think that person could actually be cut out. That person could be replaced with a completely different actor. It wouldn't change the story. It wouldn't change how I felt about it at all.
That's very true, and I think that Rufus Sewell is very underrated as an actor. Actually, he's currently in The Man in the High Castle, isn't he?
The Obergruppenführer.
That's right, yes. Which is going to be interesting as we explore the alt-right's attitude to these films. And would you like to come in on any of this, though? First of all, Neil.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when I watch Dark City and I try and make a comparison to The Matrix, I can't really do it because Dark City talks to me, and it talks to a lot of people in the way that we wake up first thing in the morning, it's dark outside, we go into our work, we don't even know what we're doing half the time because we've been given so much jobs and information, we need to process it. By the time we finish work, it's dark again. We go home, make our food, go to bed, and we wake up and it's dark again. And it's like this in Dark City, and no one ever questions it. And right up until when the detective talks about how he can't actually ever remember any times he had fun outside in the sunshine, and he can't remember how to get to any of these places where he had fun, and that talks to me in a way that I can relate to it because that is what I do in my life. And when I think about The Matrix, I think about this guy who works his office job, who suddenly learns kung fu, can shoot, can do all these acrobatics, can go into bullet time. I can't relate to that. And that's why I don't really kind of rate it in any way. And I can't even compare it to Dark City for that reason.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually. We'll sort of look at that now, I think, which is the unrealistic aspects of the Matrix, because that's something that I'd like to get into. Now, what you've said, of course, within the film, it makes sense because ultimately what we're looking at is a computer game. And I think that the Matrix certainly tapped in to the computer game generation, if you like.
Well, I think.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Carry on, Neil.
I think you're right. But then, at that particular time, 1998, gaming wasn't really that advanced back then. And I don't really think that people really connected to gaming in that sense, but I think it definitely kick-started gaming because people wanted to know how to do stuff like that. And I bet you'd even find if you looked into the history, people took up martial arts after that in a like a higher level, and they got into more sort of active sports like recreational sports after that movie. I think it changed society and made people want to become more like a heroic type of person. And the Matrix kind of propagated the feeling that everyone's a conspiracy and fight back against it. You know, you can do anything if you put your mind to it. Where in Dark City, we see that theme if you put your mind to it and you concentrate. But in Dark City, it was more if you put your mind to it and concentrate, you can overcome these guys who are hidden in darkness, who are doing all these things to us.
Well, you could also, I think, what was betrayed a lot of the, I would say, flaws behind the Matrix is also the commercial nature of it, where you would see the Nokia sponsorship, this sponsorship, that sponsorship, and the massive over-reliance on, well, just the budget. They had the budget to do these set pieces which you felt were put in to wow the audience, rather than what do we need to tell a story, what do we need to move this on, get the message across that we need. While in Dark City there was the total opposite. Every scene felt like it was a reason to be there.
Yeah. And when you think of Matrix, I mean, can anybody really remember any long lines of dialogue or any particular scene other than the girl falling over as these guys are firing bullets in slow motion at her? I mean, that's all I can really remember from the film.
That describes almost every scene. People falling over in slow motion or bullets flying. And that's almost it.
Yep. And in Dark City, every line in Dark City, every bit of dialogue, every bit of information we see is important in some way, and you can remember it.
And even in the background, you see small details like the spiral theme, which keeps appearing again and again, which you could even notice it probably in a first time view. You might say, wait a minute, what's this? It keeps cropping up, and obviously completely underlined with the detective that goes insane. But you'll notice on a second viewing things like his key, his house key, has the small details. The curtains in the flat assigned to him have an almost squirrel spiral pattern down them.
I can never notice that.
Matrix.
Yeah, it's true that spiral pattern keeps coming back throughout the film. You've got the rat in the maze, of course, of Dr. Schreiber, and you've got the scene where he looks at his fingerprint, and of course the fingerprints are spiral and everything. And when you see the city from above, you've got the spiral of clouds going around there, and that sort of reflects the many things, actually, because the city itself, of course, is a spiraling maze that you can't get out of, which is goes back to the symbolism of the rat and everything. And, of course, the detective who goes mad and commits suicide because he realized that that's the only way out, or at least for the time being. But equally, there's also this sense that that we as a sort of society, that this society that's artificial here, that itself is a maze and it's just a spiral and it's going nowhere.
And I
don't
think,
know what.
Well, here's something that I'm not sure if it's directly connected to this, but in 1998 and 1999, I think The Matrix came out. This was a generation that hadn't seen something like 9/11 yet. And I think it kickstarted this conspiracy disease in people's minds, how everything was planned, everything was orchestrated, and it sent them down this rabbit hole or this maze in itself of all these conspiracy theories that could relate to it. And I think the Matrix, combine that with the red and the blue pill theme of it definitely induced something in people that is like the maze that is in Dark City. that sort of maze of the mind where you've got all these false memories. You got things being thrown at you on a day-to-day basis, propaganda or whatever images, and this special drug that they inject into them, which gives them memories of things. The two connect in a way. So in many ways, Dark City is about the generation that the Matrix created.
Yeah, even though Dark City came first, which is interesting.
Which is even weirder, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost hard to imagine there wasn't some sort of crossover of information, because there's so many parallels and similarities.
And there is, and like I said, this kind of prepared people in a way, especially if you're fans of the film. And I remember both films being pretty big at the time. So, like I said, when 9/11 came along, and there was certain things about that didn't quite add up. This red pill, blue pill sort of conspiracy sort of thing came up, and it's really kickstarted this strange generation of children and teenagers that we have now, I think.
I think what helped pave the way for it as well is there was a big fad with the whole X-Files era for all these hundreds of conspiracy films and TV shows, as well as at that time you had the whole sort of PlayStation boom where gaming no longer was something that a small child would do, put it away, and now he was moving on to other things. PlayStation suddenly became this bridge where you just played on, and you were now absorbed into the games as a kind of full-time passion.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, where the Matrix gets its ideas from and everything, is the cyberpunk movement, which really began sort of late 70s. And you can see that in films like Blade Runner. Interestingly, of course, Blade Runner also has the theme of artificial memories. But cyberpunk sort of came out of the idea of advanced technologies, the rate of technological advancement that we were seeing, but also the idea that corporations, huge conglomerates, would come to dominate the world and to control basically how people see things and behave and so on. And this really became crystallized in works by people like William Gibson, who wrote a treatise, Is There a Cyberpunk Movement? I think that was in the early 90s, if I remember. So it was still pretty late even by then. You'd got Billy Idol, for example, releasing an album called Cyberpunk. And as I say, in the 80s you've got and 90s you've got films. Keanu Reeves, of course, had already starred in a film called Johnny Mnemonic, which bombed, as I remember. But again, it was a very influential film on the cyberpunk aesthetics of things and so on.
Here's another film just like The Matrix, though, in between Johnny Mnemonic and The Matrix. I can't remember what it's called. It's an animated sort of movie, and it's about the same theme, like artificial intelligence, false realities, multiple dimensions, things like that. I wish I could remember the name of it. It can't be that good if I can't even remember the name of it.
Certainly Matrix took a lot of influence from anime. You could tell they were obviously big fans. Things like Ghost in the Shell and some of these other big ones.
That's very true, actually. And the kung fu element comes from that sort of East Asian area, really. And I think that at that time as well, people were beginning to realize the nature of film as a global product. And so, and especially as East Asia was opening up, don't forget that, was it 97 we gave back Hong Kong to the Chinese? And that opened China up to the West and everything. But equally, it opened the West up to the Far East in ways that had, it had gone on through Japan and so on. But sort of China became a big influence. And if you look, these sort of martial arts and kung fu and all those kind of things became more mainstream in films. If you look at the difference between the action in the original Star Wars as okay, it's slower and so on. But if you look at the prequels, it's all kung fu based.
Yeah, it
And
was all that same kind of era.
yeah, all kendo based, and all these Far Eastern martial arts. Yeah, that's right. Was it 1999, the first of the prequels, if I remember rightly, which would have been the same year as The Matrix?
Done my best to forget that film, to be honest.
But in comparison to the new ones, it's not really that bad. It's
like a
being,
slap in the face or a kick in the bum.
yeah, it's like you want your left leg broken or your right leg broken. Well,
but yeah, now going back to, unless anybody wants to add anything on that,
No,
but
good.
Going back to the red pill and blue pill symbolism, I should say. The alt-right, of course, is very big on this. Now, I see this as a bit of false symbolism, actually, but although accurate in some ways. What do you think about this red pill, blue pill business?
well, for me, I'd like to ask, why do I have to swallow any pill? Like, why am I only got two choices, red or blue? Which can I not make my own decision?
Yep, that's
pretty much all I feel about it.
You definitely get the feeling that in The Matrix, he had to be handed the truth and kind of dragged out of where he was, while in Dark City he rose up because he was left with nothing, not even memories. Yet from that path he just kept pushing forward and upwards.
Yeah, it's just like what I speak about all the time, and I see it time and time again every movie, and people are probably bored of me saying this, but Hansel and Gretel all over again. You get like a little pill, you get a little reward. All you need to do is swallow it, trust us, and do anything we say. Then you got your freedom.
Well, this is the thing. Is the red pill any better than the blue pill? And is it any more true than what is given to him in the blue pill? That's the question I'd like to pose.
What if you swallow both of them? Like
purple.
Yeah.
Purple.
I've heard that on the alt-right circles, unironically.
He'd end up listening to Prince for the rest of his fucking life.
Yeah. It's a valid question. I mean, like I said, the movie plays out that you got two choices, and we're going to give you both. Whereas, what James said, in Dark City, the guy, through his own efforts, bearing in mind the guy was like blind when he first wakes up in the bathtub, he can't see where he's going. So his very first scene, he's a blind guy, and by the end of it, he's like the Uber daddy, and he ends up becoming almost like a god of this social experiment that's been engineered for the people.
It's hard not to see how it was sort of to represent birth. He's blind, he's blind, naked, comes out wet. And the first thing he does is try to see himself in the mirror. Who am I? And then it sort of continues from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have an awful lot of symbolism at the beginning of Dark City. If you look, when it first starts off, it comes, you get the shot from above, it comes down through the city, and then you see the round window, which looks suspiciously like a goldfish bowl. And then you go in through that window, and you have the man in the bath. So goldfish bowl, man in bath. Very similar things, very similar premises. But there again, the bath is also the symbol of, when he comes up, it's like when he gets out of the bath, it's like the placenta breaking. And you'll notice that the water has a certain pinky color to it. Did you notice that at all?
I just thought it was just covered in something, and they were going to explain it later on in the movie. But then I started to realize, yeah, it has to mean something. You don't just have pink water for no reason.
Yeah.
Especially when the goldfish was in it, it was clear. It was only that colour when he was in it. Because the detective later on, Bumstead, looks in the water and it's actually crystal clear with the fish.
Mm.
That's right. So it was just a sort of an effect. but it was an effect with a purpose, and that was to make it look like, like birth. And of course, he staggers around like a newborn and everything. And then, of course, he knocks over the goldfish bowl. And the goldfish bowl breaking, of course, is the symbolism for the fact that he's going to break out of this particular goldfish bowl, which is the Dark City, and and discover what it all is, and and he's going to step out into a greater world, which is again goes back to the bath symbolism. But of course as well, if you notice when the goldfish bowl shatters and the fish is left stranded, he puts the fish into the bath, which of course is a bigger world for the fish, and equally it shows his sort of humanity as well at the same time, in that he cares for this fish, and so he will in the end become sort of a benign god.
Well, if you think about it, like you said, the goldfish is in this tiny little bowl. By some pure fluke, it manages to get knocked off the shelf by John, and he picks it up and puts it in an ocean in comparison. So it's almost like a rebirth for the fish too. Even the fish gets a new life, or a new lease at life, or whatever.
It is a great bit of sort of visual storytelling compared to other sort of films of the Matrix that are kind of lower caliber, that have to sort of give you a huge screed of exposition from some character to try and explain the same thing, or they've got to hammer home what his character is. Just him picking up a goldfish, and you already know from him just stumbling about naked to saving that fish what kind of person he is.
Yeah, very much so, because of course they're trying to implant him with these memories that he's going to be the serial killer, and of course he isn't. And it's really that, I think, that the reaction against this memory, that he's not that person, and that's where the experiment goes wrong.
Yeah, it's almost as if I get the feeling when you watch the movie that this guy is on a journey through all of it. And even though he doesn't know his own name, really, he doesn't find out his real name till about halfway through the movie. He first comes into it blind. He's naked, he's wet, he slips, he falls over, and he finds a dead woman in the apartment he's at. He doesn't know where he is, but he's got this false sort of memory in him, or this piece of evidence that suggests he's a brutal murderer of some kind. And it goes on to show you that it doesn't matter what they tell you what you are, like the labels will attach to you. You should know what you are. And they remove their history, so they give them false memories that are not their own. And you see a similar thing in society today, where if you remove somebody's history, or a group of people's history, then you can remove their future. Then by doing that, you remove all their ability to go out and do things in the world. It's been reduced because they feel that they're living in a dark city, and they can't escape it because there's no point.
I think it was good though they added in the sense of hope, in the sense that you see several characters, like the hotel owner. He goes through the same script and he's replaced, and the guy says the same phrases in script, except you notice when he's muttering to himself, he says, what was it now? There's no, it was something like there's no days off or something like that on the job.
Oh, and no days off for good behaviour.
That's it. And he says the same thing as a newspaper vendor, despite the change in memories. It's as if there's something in him still rising up, despite the constant shuffling his memory, his character, his history. It's not being completely suppressed, and you get the idea that if you removed that, or he was allowed to even just continue with what he had, he would start shaping himself.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, which is this idea of Shell Beach. Shell Beach does not come from any of these memories that he's being given. Shell Beach comes from himself. And if you notice, throughout the film, Shell Beach keeps appearing. He's creating Shell Beach very slowly throughout the film, from an idea that he has, which is essentially a quintessentially white European idea of the seaside town. And don't forget that the strangers, they can't stand water.
Or
You know,
heat.
they that's right. They have a complete aversion to water, and he's creating, you know, basically this seaside town out of this sort of milieu of a racial memory, if you like, because they're never going to give him that memory.
And the Shell Beach also serves as a sort of a lure and temptation for people to get out of the Dark City, literally and figuratively, sort of driving them on as well. And it's interesting, it comes from the guy who's sort of breaking that, rising up as a leader figure. He's given them a vision, albeit unconsciously at first, to do that.
Yeah, that's right. And this is the reason, of course, why nobody knows where Shell Beach is, because it's not been created yet. It's still in his mind. Now, I wanted to have a little look at as well at the difference between this, you know, the idea of the goldfish bowl and everything, and about memory and using memory to create and so on, and compare that with the pill symbolism in the Matrix. So in the red pill and the blue pill. Now, I personally believe that the red pill does not wake you up at all. I think that it brings you to another level of the Matrix.
Absolutely. If you need a pill to wake you up to something, then are we ever going to catch on to it? It's going to be next year, next month. Like, when was it going to be? And that's why I just don't buy it. Why do you need to swallow somebody else's remedy or concoction of whatever it is they've put together for you, for your easy to consume, you know, ability? I mean, why do you have to swallow any pill? That's what I keep saying.
And even if you took the premise of the red pill, as on its own, at its face, the truth alone isn't enough. If you hand that to the detective, he got the truth through accidentally waking up, seeing what was going on, and it drove him to destruction. He was worse off in the end, just been handed the truth, but with no leader, no way out, no answers, no solution. Mm-hmm. So in the end, it's actually a bad thing for him.
No, oh, you mean Dark City here, don't you?
Sorry, yeah, I should have referred that. The detective Walensky.
Yeah.
Just like I think he almost refutes it before that film came out. Ironically.
No, but with the pills, what I'm sort of driving at really is, if you watch, even within the denouement of the film, if you watch the last one, the Revolutions film, you will notice that when Keanu Reeves gets blinded, when his character Neo gets blinded, he can still see through a sort of electronic sort of vision. And that to me means that he's not out of the Matrix. He's got to be still in the Matrix if that is possible.
That's true. That I'd kind of put that down to just kind of throwing all sorts of messianic symbols at it and hoping something stuck by the third film. But it might be a case of there was a hint that he's not actually escaped anything, that it's just another layer.
And what if someone else wrote it specifically to be that way? You know, just as a game or as a story. How would you ever know? That's why the film's just really stupid, and I just don't rate it. You can't get to grips with a film like that, especially when it tells you that in order to have your freedom, in order to be heroic, you need to swallow a pill, metaphorically, of course.
And then accept brainwashing from this brand new team to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Literally in the form of the computer program, they drive right into his brain.
Yep. But on the plus side, they do give you a really cool trench coat and lots of guns and some shades. And that was pretty popular back then. That was the look back then. Long coats, shades, and that's how you got people into an audience. Like every movie after it was a guy in a long trench coat. Like they're the most impractical things to wear during a gunfight, I'd imagine.
Oh yeah, and the whole that kind of underlines the whole film. But it was a fashionable film. It wasn't an eternal film. I think another 20 years of aging, I don't think it'll actually hold up as well as people might have imagined at the first showing.
Yeah, well, all that sort of long trench coats and glasses and stuff, that again comes from the cyberpunk aesthetic. And it's a pretty dystopian aesthetic, actually. You know, I would not like to live in a cyberpunk kind of world, actually, where there's no nature, really. Everything is controlled by corporations. And, you know, it's almost a self-defeating aesthetic. And the world's pretty much a shithole. And actually, if you look at what they're waking up into, or allegedly waking up into, it's you know it's a pretty shitty place, and it's suspiciously called Zion.
The literal Zionists.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, and I looked at some of the, because we sort of have to look at the meta narrative here. And if we look at the meta narrative, these three people, the Trinity, as you know, one the female version is called Trinity, isn't she? This woman, and you've got a sort of Christian messianic idea to it, with Neo as the Messiah. Of course, his name means new, so he's the new man, if you like. And of course, he's a happer. And you have the based black man. And also the vehicle that they ride around in is called the Nebuchadnezzar. And he in the Bible is called the Destroyer of Nations, very interestingly. And you have huge miscegenation propaganda in the Matrix. You look at that party that they have, you know, in this shitholy place, in this cave, and look at how many black men with white women you have in there.
And of course, you've got Mouse, the one guy who's possibly white, and he's the most feeble, browbeaten, looked down upon character of all.
Yep, and then of course you have is he called Bane, if I remember rightly, who sells out?
Oh, Cypher.
Cypher, yes, that's
the most obvious turncoat ever, telegraphed from day one, but they kept him on this super secret ship anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? And there again with Cypher, if this is reality, then how does Agent Smith manage to get into his brain? Again, this shows to me that it is just another level of the Matrix. Have I astonished everyone there?
Yeah, it's actually caught me off. That it was one of these things that I think I just felt like I'd missed a scene. You know, like they hadn't wrote it, or it was cut, because he does just appear eating dinner with them, and you think, how's this happening? Plus, of course, there was a whole absurdity of how is he actually going to get back in, and why is he trusting this person? You know, the turncoat who is somehow they're going to go to great lengths to save.
Exactly. It's a very much a forced narrative. The other symbolism in the film is with the number 6, and we all know, of course, that number 6 and Zion belong to a certain ethnicity of people. For example, in the beginning, you have a focus onto the digit number 6 when you have all that sort of computer, the digits flowing down, you know, from the computerized system or whatever, that graphic that you have at the beginning. Then all of a sudden, you have the beginning where the cops are breaking into that room. And it's room 303. So 3 plus 0 plus 3 is 6. This is also Matrix version number 6, as the architect says in Matrix Reloaded. And So there's a lot of meta-narrative symbolism there from the Wachowski brothers, who we must not forget are a pair of degenerates.
Who are now the Wachowski? What are they? The Wachowski sisters now, I believe they are.
No, no, don't buy into that. Don't buy into
Sorry,
that. They're not sisters. They're not
yeah,
sisters.
that's right. That's
I
right.
made the mistake of looking them up. I hadn't
Yeah.
seen the pictures.
Yeah. And do you know, I'm going to test you guys here, and anybody who's listening, there is a number 6 at the very beginning of Dark City.
Ah, no, I didn't know that. You've got me there. You've got me there, Neil.
It's right near the beginning. I want everybody to go and see if they can see it. And there's a number 3. Everybody knows 3 plus 3 is 6, and 6 is a very important number to a certain group of people.
Yeah, well, you do have a certain amount of symbolism between the strangers and a certain group of people, don't you, in Dark City?
Oh, it's a fantastic... I can't believe it's not been tapped as a sort of meme in alt-right cultural source. If they're into the Matrix, why not Dark City?
Well, I wrote an article, 2 articles actually, on Dark City sometime last year. I think the beginning of last year. And it was the first time that most people had heard of it. It got circulated quite a bit. So, but it seems to have been forgotten about largely by the alt-right in preference for this very strange film, The Matrix. Why anyone would buy into the symbolism of The Matrix is beyond me.
I think it's important as well what kind of brackets the whole film and kind of leaves you with a long-lasting impression after is obviously the ending. And when you look at the ending of The Matrix, well, what is it? He makes a vague threat and he flies off, and everything continues. While in Dark City, you've got this really uplifting ending where he becomes the leader he was meant to be. He shapes, he certainly begins the first steps of shaping a world that his people deserves. And it also shows the romance, which, despite the memory change, still surfaces up because those are 2 people who you could say are meant to be together or just click, no matter what people have done to them.
The thing is, I think the problem is that for a long time, because of a certain group of people who shall not be named, people are often scared to connect movies like Dark City to... I've got to be really careful here that I don't actually say who I'm talking about, because the similarities are obvious, but people will deny that because of their political persuasion or whatever. Especially in media, where even Roman Polanski, I mean, he gets away with raping a child because he's a Jewish guy. So it's very hard for people to make these connections, and I certainly wouldn't think that the director would want that connection made to him either, even though it's obvious.
No,
Yeah.
A career ender. You can be subtle, but you can't be blatant.
Yeah.
Well, this is the interesting thing. I mean, how did Alex Proyas get away with that, really? I mean, one of the reasons I think he got away with it was that one of the co-writers on it was David Goyer, who is Jewish. It's an odd name for a Jew, actually, Goyer. But anyway.
Yeah.
The guy I know.
And the funny one is near the end, Ralph Richardson says, "Shut it down." How obvious do you
I
want
couldn't
it?
stop laughing when that came on, to be honest. I was like, why isn't that been on YouTube somewhere with media logos on the face or something?
I know, it's incredible. It has me in tears now when he says that. Even though it's meant to be really serious at that point, but just because of who it's associated with and everything, and the blatant way that Alex Proyas has got that out, it's unbelievable. Frankly, how the hell did Hollywood
Shut it all down, he says.
shut it all down? And You can imagine the Hollywood executives, suddenly seeing this and go, "Shut it all down!"
Can you imagine trying to get something like that by now?
Oh, you'd never get away with it, would you? I mean, look at them. They're sort of bald, anemic looking creatures that hide in the darkness. They don't touch water, so they obviously don't wash, right? We can assume that they're scared of sunlight and it kills them. And I don't know how he got away with it, why nobody made the connection. Surely it can't be just us three who have seen this and gone, wait a minute.
When you start listing off like a parasitic other that uses these people's culture and memories cynically for their own ends, it keeps on going on and on. It's almost hammered home, but obviously very cleverly, or else even then it wouldn't have got made in the 1999 or 8, sorry.
Yeah, and it's absolutely extraordinary. But I mean, the aesthetic, of course, owes itself to Nosferatu, the F.W. Murnau film. But and so to sort of he's hidden that message behind the idea of vampires, but vampires themselves are sort of personifications of Jewishness, and always have been. That has come up time and time again. So these sort of others from Eastern Europe that that have an aversion to Christianity, that and have an aversion to silver because, of course, of the 30 pieces of silver of Judas.
Supposed to be obsessed with counting as well.
Yeah, that's right. Obsessed with counting, and they can only come in if you invite them in.
And also, one other thing is that horrible teeth chattering thing that they do when they're scared or in danger and they're communicating with each other. They click their teeth together in indecipherable language.
Yeah, and isn't that that has something to do with Jewish people when they're insulting people or something, isn't it?
Really? Well, there you go then. I mean, how did he get away with it? I mean, that's a whole bunch of points we've made just right there. Surely somebody in Hollywood released this. Then when he seen it at the cinema in the premiere night, he just like face palmed and was like, "Oh fuck, what have I done?"
It's even the way you can kind of see that they're looking for the magic stuff for that people, and it's almost all European people that you see in it, and they're hunting for what is this magic thing that lets these people succeed and survive when we cannot, from the Strangers' point of view. I mean, they're even called the Strangers, which is like the other, which implies other things.
And also, if you notice, there's a theme that recurs through it when they do their change at midnight and everything gets shifted around. Entire buildings will disappear. Some will become even bigger and grander, and people at the bottom of the pile rise to the top of the pile, and they become the elites. And the next day, they could be back to the bottom again. Their jobs and their lives and their value, everything is being pushed around and shifted by somebody else who's controlling their life and controlling everything that they do, and there's no way out of it, or so they like to get across. That's a trick though in the movie. The illusion that they're putting down in the people is that you can't get out of this. There's no way out.
Yeah, well, this is one of the central themes, I think, of the film, where you have the natural aristocrat who rises up. So and he's of course from his own people, and so he has that noblesse oblige and that sort of humanity that you can see when he saves the goldfish at the very beginning. And of course, he creates this nice seaside idyll at the end for his people, as much as for himself as well, of course.
And I think it's important as well that he does it without memories, which is made so clear in the film, so you understand that that's coming from whatever makes him him. It's not some instruction or second-hand story. Nobody's handed him a pill to say, go make a beach.
it's also quite encouraging to somebody like me because I'm sure everybody's done a lot of things throughout their life that they wish they maybe done it another way. And this film shows that it doesn't really matter about that because that can't be controlled, and everything that you've gone through to get to this point, you can't help what you've done or whatever, but you can absolutely like go and push for a good future. And that's like the thing I love about this movie, well, Dark City, that is, that it gives you that bit of hope because this guy's a nobody. He hasn't got a job, he hasn't got a name, so to speak. He hasn't got a mother or father that he was raised with. All he is just a blank memory who's blind and naked. And he rises up despite all this, whether or not it's because he conditioned himself over a period of time and just forgot about it. That's a good thing about this movie. If you really think deeply about it, has this guy been conditioning himself time and time again to beat these guys? And every time the clock resets and everything's shuffled around, they try and take all of that, but he's kept it, he's retained it, and he's learned how to do it. So he's actually got this natural progression. It's not by some quirk of fate. And when Schreiber gives him the injection towards the end of the movie, you almost get the feeling that this injection inspired him or unlocked everything for him. But that had been building up in him prior to that anyway. It was just the last thing he needed to push him to stand up for himself.
Yeah, very, very much. It's interesting, actually, the interaction between Schreiber and John Murdoch, because each of them sort of gives something to the other. Because Schreiber lacks courage, and he sort of lends his courage from Murdoch. But Murdoch has no sort of ideas or anything, about anything. He's raw, whereas Schreiber is, he has experience, he has a certain amount of wisdom and knowledge and intelligence, and the two work together in harmony.
Well, the thing is, I would say I kind of disagree with you. I don't think Schreiber is weak or cowardly or anything like that. If anything, I think he's the strongest character because John can do this thing called tuning. He's effectively becomes a god at the end. Schreiber's the guy who's going to lose everything. He's the one that's like a slave, a personal slave to these guys. He knows what they're capable of, so he's not really scared. I think he's the real hero of the movie. I think he's the everyday guy.
Well, sorry, go on.
All right.
No, you're
He
right.
was a character that was, you could see he was almost broken, but I think that's the important part. He was almost broken, and you could see he still had that spark of defiance in him, which obviously helped spur on everything that happened. So I could see where, although he was regularly kind of came across as a coward compared to the hero, he still had something in him, the spark of it, to defy and to do something that would, cause a risk to himself, despite the horrific beatings, tortures, whatever they've done to him, to force him into subservient role.
Yeah, that's true. I think that he is brave in the end. That is very true. But it's really John that has forced him into that bravery. If you look at when they take that journey towards the edge of the city, and if you notice as well, the further they go out towards the end of the city, the more abstract things get, which is that aesthetic is taken from German expressionism, expressionist films of the 1920s, especially the Cabinet of Dr. Mabuse, I think it's called. And he gets more and more afraid the further towards the edge of the city they get, until, is almost an emotional wreck at the end. But I think that both Neil and I sort of agree to an extent in that he does have courage, but for me, he needs that courage unlocking. And that is what Murdoch does. He, as the natural aristocrat, he gives courage to others.
That being said, though, it was Schrader who contacted John first.
That's also very true. Yeah, yeah, you're right there. You're certainly right there. So as James was saying, he isn't broken completely,
Yeah.
and he does sense that there is hope in John.
He's kind of like almost like, you know, an addict or somebody with a phobia doing a small cry for help. But although he had to reach out to John, and he obviously asked for it in a way, when people are like that, they still need to be dragged out sometimes. And if you try and drag out somebody that's got a fear of open spaces out their house, they'll kick and scream and panic right up to, and they'll get more frightened the closer to the door they get, right up to maybe the point they're out, and it finally sheds off. And I think the Doctor was like that. He, except for him, obviously, it was facing the truth that he already knew anyway, but having to accept that being now known to everybody was the last hurdle for him, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think there is that idea of the fear of truth, and he contrasts a lot with Inspector Bumstead, actually, because Bumstead is someone who's he's that very stoic character, really. And he really is the one who wants to find out the truth and so on. He realizes that things don't make sense. And what John, what John Murdoch says to him rings true. And you have that sort of contrast that that one of them is. I think that Bumstead is a braver character than Schreiber in a way, but that's because, of course, Schreiber's been broken before by the strangers and been tortured, and you can see that, of course, in the scar tissue and everything on his face.
I think Bumstead was almost like a proto John. You could imagine that with another push, or maybe if you take the film sort of look at it, if he'd evolved another step or something had happened, Bumstead could have been another John, because you see he's starting to spot things that are wrong. You see he's a man of action, and he sort of stands out from everybody. Obviously, the actor's presence helps, but you could tell he's a different person. He'd probably be a different person no matter what role he was put in.
Yeah, that's very true. He's sort of John's right-hand man, if you like. He's if you imagine John as a king, Bumstead would be his man-at-arms or something like that.
The sort of Batman in the old sort of military look at it.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And it's, of course, Bumstead gets his. In the end, he dies, but he gets his reward of finally finding out the truth, doesn't he?
Which was a much better reveal than the theatrical version. It just has to be mentioned again how poor the theatrical version is to the director's cut. For anybody listening, do not watch the theatrical cut. Ever.
It really is like a new movie, isn't it? It's a really bad attempt. And when I first watched it, like when I was in my teenage years, I genuinely thought it was just like a really bad movie until a couple of years ago, and someone suggested I go and watch the director's cut version. And I was really reluctant because I thought, no, I watched this almost 20 years ago and hated it. It's not going to improve any. But it was like a new movie I was watching.
And you get the impression from it that, if you just look at maybe the DVD, you think, is this Hellraiser? Is what am I actually been sold here? And obviously it's nothing nothing like that, but you think it's going to be a really low budget B movie horror film.
Yeah, well, I ought to mention this for people listening, that it was actually marketed as a horror film. And if you look at the posters that were released, it gives it that impression that, basically these people, as you said, are like Cenobites from Hellraiser. So I think that's one of the reasons it didn't do well at the box office. as well as, of course, it being chopped and having this narrative, this narration at the beginning put on it that gives the whole game away. It's like kind of having Kevin Spacey in The Usual Suspects give a little narration at the beginning saying, and what Inspector, whatever his name is, doesn't realize is that I'm Kaiser Soze. It really is that bad. And,
it's insulting as well. If you think about it, it's insulting to people. It's basically saying, here's a movie about, and I hate this term, but waking up. But in order to wake up, we've got to explain everything to you before the movie even begins.
Ironically, sort of almost handing you the red pill again right at the start, as if you couldn't manage otherwise.
Well, this is the thing why I think that The Matrix did well and Dark City didn't, because essentially, I think that Hollywood executives think that they have to dumb films down for the audience, and I think that in a way they're right as well. There was an interesting video done by Red Letter Media, who I think we all know, and it was on why Titanic became the biggest selling film of all time when it came out. And it's basically that people aren't particularly intelligent, that that they don't want to think very hard in films, and that it has to appeal to the masses, and the masses of the entire world. And I think that that's the reason why The Matrix did well, and why films like Dark City will never do well again. And in fact, the reason why films like Dark City will never be produced.
Not anymore. It's certainly not now. It's a shame because it really did bring an end to an era of movie making, the late 90s. There were some pretty good movies in the 90s. And since then, movies have changed in tone and the way they put themselves across, because the world's a completely different place now. It's like completely different to what it was 20 years ago. And if you look at a similar thing in society, in 1968, just when Vietnam was really kicking off, we had Night of the Living Dead. And it was terrifying, that movie, for people, because for the first time they were seeing something that almost equaled the horror and what they were seeing on the news every time they got home from work. It equaled it. And it had to equal it because things like that weren't scary anymore. And back then, when you had Matrix and Dark City, like I said, this is pre 9/11, so people were kind of asleep back then. And this whole thing about awakening, alternate realities, that was cool and scary back then, but it just doesn't cut it now. However, Dark City is still 100% relevant to what society's like. And that's why I think it will probably remain a classic cult movie.
Yeah, I just wish more people knew about it, to be honest. Especially more allegedly thinking people.
Yeah, especially people who are talking about looking for alternative symbols, alternative media, and they're combing through, obviously, a lot of cultural artifacts left over, and they seem to keep missing it and hitting on a lot of, frankly, crap, to be honest.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things about the alt-right. I think that people are deliberately being misled into garbage and nonsense and everything. And I think that that's one of the reasons why they use matrix symbolism.
A sort of trap to kind of funnel the mind down an odd path. Well, I think with Dark City, it'd be very hard to misinterpret or to misuse the messages in it.
Very much so. And as I say, what's the message of the two? Ultimately, well, the message of the Matrix is that you sort of wake up from one thing where you're a sort of consumer drone, and you can have your heroism, but as long as you don't question things like miscegenation, you don't question things like why you're defending Zion, and you'll be all right. But the Dark City has a totally different message. And Dark City's message is basically, well, there are these people, who govern society, who are not like us, who basically use us as rats in an experiment, in social experiments. And can you take control of that? Can you wrest control from these people and become an aristocrat for your own people? And I think that that's a far better message.
Absolutely. And the Matrix for me, this is why I just don't like the whole generation it spawned. And I really do think it spawned a generation of people who really became super stupid, because it almost gives false hope, and it's a little bit nihilistic, really, isn't it? The movie. Don't worry about like the invasion of Syrian migrants, or don't worry about like white murders in South Africa, because none of it's real anyway. It's all being written in some cyber world. Nothing exists. There's no such thing as crime. There's no such thing as hate. Everything's in the matrix, and we're a part of it, and you can't get out of it. I think that's the most boring, most nihilistic way of thinking that you could possibly have. Whereas Dark City says, like what you just said there, we are being controlled, but it's not by some cyber race of people or cyber race of aliens. It's by very real people, and they're hidden, and they're using us like rats in mazes, and laughing and poking at us, changing our jobs, changing our lives, changing everything about our way of life, so that we feel that we can never get out of this maze.
And the other key difference between the two is, what do the people do when given their freedom? You see John Murdoch immediately, as soon as he's able, starts to shape things for the better. And yet in the Matrix, when you see him get into the free world, there's already supposedly free people. And you see this place that's absolutely awful. They're dressed like something that was dragged out of a bin. Even the aesthetics of the ship, nobody's painted anything. Everything's dirty. Everything's as bland as possible. There's no art. There's nothing aesthetic or pleasing or interesting about the world they've created, despite the freedom they were given.
That's very true, and that's a very important comment to make, actually. That despite despite allegedly waking up and everything, they're just exactly the same. They're just like animals, really. They're not really human beings on a higher plane, and they have high technology. They can create things better, like this slop, for example, that they eat. Surely they can do better than that slop. They've got huge amounts of technology, and then they dress in these rags and everything. Why do they dress in these rags when they've got this amazing technology? And you'll notice that not all of them dressing those rags, because you have those people at the top who control things, and they're in nice white little uniforms. I don't know if you noticed that, as opposed to the general populace who are sort of dressed in rags and everything. But in any case, there's no need for it. Why? You're absolutely right, James. Why is there no great art?
It's like they just don't care anymore. There's nothing there to actually make anything better. Because obviously that needs to come from within, but there's nothing within to make the world around them better anymore.
Yeah, and if you look at the party scene again, all they want to do is have their hedonism and everything, and that's it. That's their reward. But there's nothing to sort of drive them on to greater things. They just want to sort of, and this again is, a post-Marxian idea that comes from Adorno and Marcuse and the rest of the Frankfurt School and so on, that what you want to be working towards is absolute freedom, where you can just be hedonistic and be damned with everything else. So you don't look at higher things. You don't look at art or culture or scientific progress. We have scientific progress here, but scientific progress in the sense of exploring the universe, finding out, what it's all about, the ultimate questions. What is everything all about? And when the left, they talk about progress, what they're really doing is they're abusing the word like they abuse so many other words. Because I'm all for scientific progress. I'm all for cultural progress. But these people are for regress and for basically living like not animals, because animals, they do things, and they do things for the survival of their own, their species and so on. But these people aren't. They, it's just complete atomized individualism and self-gratification.
Almost seems to me that some of them almost want shit to hit the fan by being lazy, not getting involved, not doing anything to contribute, sitting back and watching the world go by and blaming everybody else when it does actually happen, or pointing fingers and blaming someone, taking the quick, easy option.
But you see, I see a lot of this in the alt-right as well.
Yeah, that's heavily promoted. You see that littered in comments. You could spend a whole lifetime arguing with people with that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And when you look around how many people in, the alt-right has quite a lot of people in it now. But how many of them are actively doing something positive? Very few. And there are a lot of people who are doing things negative, like sort of spreading negative propaganda, concentrating on bad news porn and so on, that gives people a negative view of life instead of a positive view that things can be better. And ultimately this leads to nihilism and an apocalyptic vision of society. This is why, of course, I don't like Christianity and never have done, because it has an apocalyptic vision of things that basically things will end. Some of you will be saved, a lot of you won't, and that'll be it. Well, that's not natural. That's not nature. Nature is about, yes, there is death, but there is also rebirth and renewal. And Christians might come back and say, well, Christ was reborn and all this kind of nonsense, but he's the only one, isn't he? and this sort of look towards this sort of this idea that this world is transitory, that this world is ephemeral, and that there's a spiritual world afterwards. And you sort of think, well, this world can all go to hell, and it should go to hell because we're going to be saved at the end of it. And that is an extremely unhealthy view to have. And I think that that the alt-right has that view, especially the American alt-right, which is very much comes from a Christian background, from that sort of Bible Belt attitude. We, of course, in Scotland, particularly in Scotland and in the north of England, we sent those buggers over to America out of the way once we got rid of Cromwell.
That's the thing. And a lot of people on the alt-right seem to do this thing now. Maybe they've always been like this. I'm not old enough to remember, but a lot of idolizing of people like Gavin McInnes, and I don't even know half these people's names, to be honest with you, but I see a lot of charismatic characters cropping up every so often, and people put on a couple of masks and wear a bomber jacket and fucking Dr. Martin boots. And I want to say to these people, is that the best you've got? Is that the only thing you're worthy of? Following somebody else, following what somebody else believes, putting on your military gear that you bought off of militaryfirst.com or something like that, and being a foot soldier for somebody.
I think, unfortunately, there's a strong instinct to hope for some kind of leader, either to follow or just who'll step in and solve everything. Just tell you what to do, and you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll be perfect.
Well, this is again why I don't like those kind of those kind of ideologies. That you have one leader and you follow him, and even if he goes mad and invades Czechoslovakia and Poland and so on, you follow him anyway. And even if he attacks the Soviet Union, although it doesn't exist anymore, you follow him anyway, and so on. And and again, that is to do with an apocalyptic vision, I think. But going back to Dark City, I think that is a very healthy vision, that you look inside yourself and see the leader in yourself and realize the need to create and to have a certain vision and a positive vision, and to act upon that vision and try to create the things that you have in mind that are beautiful, that are intrinsically beautiful, based on the aesthetics that have gone before and that will be developed for your race, because every race has its own aesthetics. And you'll notice in Dark City, of course, that we're focusing on white people here. There are some black people in it, but they're very peripheral figures. I think, if I remember rightly, there's only one black person that gets any lines in the film, and that's the railway guard on the underground. We're concerned with European people here.
I think Bumstead was also a good example of how, although you'd want people to kind of step forth as leaders, they can still work together. He was a strong man. He was his own man, but he still had the sense to work with somebody else when it made sense.
Yeah, that's right. And so you have three very different characters there. You have Straber, you have Bumstead, and you have John Murdoch, all working together and using their different skills and abilities to overthrow this alien people.
There was another character, though, Emma, played by, and I hate saying this because I know she's Jewish, but I think she's the best looking woman that ever lived, Jennifer Connelly. She's an important character as well.
She's only half Jewish, though, isn't she?
Well, she's not from Dublin, though, is she? Let's be honest.
Yes. Irish and Norwegian, I think, on the father's side.
I'm not sure. I've heard she's one of them. She wouldn't marry me anyway. I haven't got enough money for a start.
But I mean, it makes a huge difference if they're full blown or if they're, or if they're half and half. You only have to look at people like Alicia Silverstone, Goldie Hawn, and then compare them with Ayn Rand, for example. Or
Rachel Riley as well. She's Jewish.
Or Hannah Arendt. Rachel Riley
is Jewish. Yeah, I almost fainted because I was so heartbroken when I found out.
Get me to Wikipedia just a moment. What the hell is
she's I'm sure she said in an interview she's a good little Yiddish girl, and she's looking
what?
Yeah, and I was like, oh no, that's like your dream woman just dumping you right on the spot.
Heart's broken live on air.
Yeah, and so's Carol Vorderman. She's Jewish as well. Then I think
no. She's from her parents are from the Netherlands, I'm sure.
Apparently, think about it. Rachel Riley, Carol Vorderman, both suspected Jewish girls, both really incredibly good at maths. It's all adding up. I've broken multiple hearts today.
Yeah, Rachel Riley is indeed. She says Jewish. I would imagine that she's only partly there, so though.
We should have a
Well,
minute
you'll
of
save
silence.
money in Valentine's cards next time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to stop writing to her.
Yes, Carol Vorderman is Dutch and Welsh. I thought there was no Jew in her. No.
Oh, thank God.
In fact, her great grandfather was called Adolf, which is nice.
Really?
Yes, really. And in fact, she is Dutch. Yeah. I'm looking at Adolf Vorderman here to see what he did. Although there were at one time Jewish people called Adolf, but for some reason it's fallen out of favor. I don't know why that is. The guy who Adolf Joffe, wasn't it? The guy who exported communism to China. He was a Jew. So there we go. Famous Adolf, Jewish Adolf. Anyway, we sort of got right away from things. I think we should wrap up there then. Anything to add on these two films?
Get Dark City and DVD. Don't get Matrix.
And make sure you get the director's cut. That is very, very important.
Especially for a first viewing.
Yeah. But anybody who thinks that when they see the DVD box cover and they think Dark City is a bit of a cheesy name, and they look at the back and they see guys in like what looks like leather bondage kit or whatever, don't let that put you off. It is a fantastic movie. I just think it's got a really bad rep over the past 20 years because of the publicity surrounding it, the various versions of it.
There's also a bit of backlash against CGI, I noticed recently, with fans and critics. So if you like practical effects and miniatures, Dark City's great.
That's right. It doesn't really have a lot of CGI in it compared to what The Matrix did. It's
very limited. It's just when you've got to have it to explain something. But most of it, like the cityscape's fantastic and it looks so real.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed in The Matrix, now it's getting on for near 20 years old, you see some of the showpiece CGI starts to look now to sort of now spoiled eyes, I suppose. It's artificial looking. It no longer impresses. But the miniatures hold up.
Yes, it's very true that actually, if you look at a film like Blade Runner, it hasn't dated at all, really. Whereas the CGI-based films from the late 90s, early 2000s, even if you look at the Star Wars prequels, for example, which had the best of technology at the time, they've dated an awful lot. Lord of the Rings as well.
I think as well, what makes it worse is people are probably playing computer games with better graphics than what we saw in these 90s films.
Very much so, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Dark City is a much better quality film than The Matrix, and people who are in the, on the radical right really ought to watch this film and not The Matrix. And so I always say, forget about the blue pill or the red pill. You don't want any pills. You should ask yourself, can you tune? And so I'll leave you with that thought. And I'll say thank you to our guest, James.
Welcome.
And thanks as ever to Neil.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you next episode. Goodbye.
Goodbye.